Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right. Well, his memoir is called Never Better. Two kids, their dad, and his wife's ghost. Gonzalo Riedel joins me on the program to discuss it. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So you write early on in talking to your kids that, this book that their mom's not here to defend herself, but more so even that she was the one who would correct you on details. And that,
That's right.
every true story you tell is actually a sham by accident. And taking that into account, like how much hesitation did you have in writing a book like this and trusting your memory?
I think had I not acknowledged it in print, had I not addressed the fact that I'm probably going to mess some of this up, somebody might correct me along the way, which has happened. And it's just minor details in smaller ways, or I remember this thing differently, or this was slightly different. I think had I not addressed it, I don't know if I would have ever been able to get the book done because then I would have been worried about the factual accuracy of it. But then acknowledging that I didn't understand, or that acknowledging that some of the details might be wrong in a way that it's not me trying to guide the narrative away from the truth so much as me trying to remember the truth and maybe mishandling it here or there. It kind of freed me up. And then that became kind of part of the book's DNA, that it as much as the book became about my experience, it was also the fallibility of memory and how every story you try to concoct is going to be a sham in some way, is going to be inaccurate. And any story you tell about somebody is still a reflection on yourself. So I think it became a kind of more comment on the memoiring process itself, which maybe is a little meta for even my tastes, but I think I wouldn't have gotten it done if had I not brought that up.
Do you read a lot of memoir?
I read nonfiction. I don't read a lot of memoir. And it wasn't like I wanted to come in and be like, okay, I'm going to come change the scope of whatever's happening here, or I'm going to come into this with a degree of disrespect to the nature of memoir. But no, it's not really my first go-to. Cancer stories, these kinds of books, the kind of book I wrote isn't really the kind of thing I gravitate towards, which became kind of part of the fun of it. I mean, if you want to call any of it fun, it became part of the challenge of it. That's for sure. Why do you ask?
Well, I'm curious just because, if it's something that you wrestle with in terms of that fallibility, right? Like if you read other people's works and question it versus, writing something and questioning it, how much is that baked into kind of like your familiarity with the genre versus like your own distrust of yourself?
I think it's more of a distrust of myself. I don't necessarily read books that are memoirs and question the notion of it unless it's stylistic. Do I mean? I remember when I was reading like, Truman Capote for the first time, reading it in Cold Blood, and he's really kind of almost fictionalizing this non-fictional account to make it more engaging to readers. And you're like, well, you can't possibly know what they're really thinking. You can't really do that. You know that there's liberties that are taken. And sometimes it's one of those things that you expect that kind of liberty to be from other people. But then when it comes time to address it yourself, you hold yourself to a different standard than you would necessarily hold other people. So I think it was more of me as a writer than me as a reader.
So you didn't feel you were at liberty. Is that what you're saying?
To
Well, you're
to
saying about like the Capote-esque aspect of like some embellishment or invention that you didn't allow yourself that, it sounds like.
I think there might have been certain times that maybe to fit the timelines of certain things, I would it let me relax on it a little bit. I mean, I tried to be as truthful as my memory allowed, that even if certain things didn't fit the timeline or certain things went down a little bit differently, I tried being as honest as I could about it. I don't think I really took liberties, but I think again addressing it early in the book in a very self-conscious way was my way, I think, of allowing me to proceed forward. I think I wrote that maybe with the intention of just editing it out when I became more comfortable with the process of it. But then it became part of it. Like there was no way of avoiding it. So I left it in there. Yeah.
So in terms of the drafting process, like had you kept any notes or journals during the period in which your wife's cancer, first happened, or was like this, all completely like from memory afterwards? Like what?
Yeah, it was all completely from memory afterwards. Even that was the really tricky part was the documentation when it came down to the real nuts and bolts and the real figuring out. Because in my head, because in real life, the time that she was sick from the point that she was diagnosed to the point that she died was really short. Like it was a matter of months. And in my head, it's something that feels like it went for 7 or 8 years. And that wasn't the case at all. And then a lot of it was almost there were certain things that I was kind of finding myself avoiding, not just because I didn't want to talk about her getting sick or the her dying and et cetera. It was more the piecing together the timelines with documentation I didn't necessarily have. And I think that's where a lot of the self-consciousness came in because I was trying to remember, okay, at what point did we notice that there was something up? And at what point did she get an official diagnosis? When did the surgery happen? When did this happen versus this happen? And trying to piece it together was probably as much of a challenge as anything else without actually really trying to get a hold of, the official documentation or trying to use that to try to piece it together from memory, I think was a harder thing. So I remember seeking out, her sisters who do have a better memory of this sort of thing. What point did this happen? Do I remember it that way? And a lot of it I found myself putting off to almost the last moment because it was just a matter of remembering what happened when, in which place does this go? How do I fit that? And that was I think more of a craft thing than a self-conscious thing. I think it was, yeah, I don't know. When it came down to really adhering to the timeline or that kind of truth of the matter, to make sure that I had the order of things right. Because there's a thought process that happens while things are happening. And I'm trying to remember, did this happen here at this point? And did this happen over here? But no, I didn't actually have any notes from the time. A lot of it was after the fact. And so I found myself in that case, because every time I would try to sit down and draft anything, I would start talking about one thing and then my head would get cloudy and I'd find myself talking about something else entirely and not really knowing where I was going when I was starting. At any point that I would sit down with the notepad and try to piece it together. So the way that I did this, which is very unlike a lot of other pieces of writing, was that I literally carried a pocket notebook with those Dollarama notebooks that will fit in my pocket. And every time I had a thought that I wanted to see through to completion, whether it had anything to do with the narrative itself, would just get written down and I would try to write it down and commit that to memory. So it was, or not commit to memory, commit to paper. And I found that in stuffing these things, it was a matter of organizing what went where. But in doing that, whenever I would try to write these things, a lot of them would get, I don't know, philosophical. They would get a lot. There would be a lot of there'd be a lot of pontificating, a lot of just not really engaging reading, just so much more me trying to work through my stuff in almost a journal entry sort of style. But I don't know, it got done. I feel like I veered completely from the question from where your line is.
That's fine. I appreciate it because I'm always interested in process, but particularly for something like this, when you're drawing on the past, but you didn't necessarily document it in real time. But it sounds like almost like you had a bunch of like visual snapshots and you were kind of like assembling a photo album in some way. Like you were like, oh, here's a picture. And then the process kind of led to like putting it in some sequence.
That was actually exactly the analogy I would use when I was putting it together. That for a while, because the book itself is in a very fragmented sort of way. There's one page on this, and 3 pages on this, and then a half a page on this, and they flutter around. And I tried to keep some semblance of organization and to keep it engaging, so it wouldn't be too many periods of philosophizing and all those sorts of things. But Yeah, I definitely considered it like this. Here's a snapshot of this. Here's a snapshot of this. Here's a snapshot, like memories. It very much felt like how my brain works in terms of, hey, I don't know why I just thought of this. I won't, you wake up thinking about a thing and you're like, why am I thinking about this? And I wanted to have that kind of quality to it where you're like, why am I thinking about this now? Why am I thinking about this now? But in a way that, it's easy for me to do because it's in my brain and I remember it, but it's another thing to try to express that clearly in a way that I would find engaging as a reader.
So you're having all these kind of like disparate thoughts or memories. What's like the assemblage or sifting process like on that first pass?
Well, um, probably none at first. The way that I did it, which was the one thing, once I decided to keep it fragmented, the idea was to keep it, the idea at first was to not have it fragmented, to have it running smooth like any other piece of prose. But then when I finally accept the fact that that's not going to work, and I do have to, I grew up reading Vonnegut, and I didn't mean to ape his style, but, here we go. And so I found myself writing in these fragments and allowing that. Um, One of the things I was looking forward to most, which I eventually got to do when I had all these pieces that I didn't know what to do with, I ended up typing them up because they were written longhand, and so I found myself typing them up, and then I would number them sequentially based off of the order I typed it and nothing else. So, they would have an order, and then when I had it all done, I printed it up and I literally cut each section apart so that I ended up with, I don't know, 140 different sections of whatever. And I had another piece of paper, and then I found myself just stacking. Okay, 17 goes first, and 65, and 9, 17. You know what I mean? Like in all these sort of like these orders of whatever. And I'd find myself, oh, I wrote on the same topic 3 times. Oh, I'm missing this entirely. This is not here. And it helped frame everything a lot better. But in terms of the initial pass, yeah, not a lot of filtration that happened initially. But then once I managed to get it in that order and then see it in a roughish draft, it all made sense to me, and I stopped panicking for one, and then I was able to go, okay, I'm missing this part, where she sees this doctor for this reason, or where we're discussing this, or you can really see what's there and what's not there.
You work as an editor in addition to being a writer. Like, were you able to kind of divorce yourself from your own writing and see it as an editor in order to kind of help you through that process?
Not at that time. I can't have, I always have the same two functions as editor and writer happening at the same time. And I deliberately try to divorce those two while I'm writing. But because I don't really read memoir, and because I don't really read, cancer survival stories or parenting sort of things, and I'm coming into this genre almost like making a point, like it wasn't like I read a bunch of memoir in preparation of this, um, because I still wanted it to, I know what memoir looks like, and I didn't want to come in with a sense of disrespect to it, something that I don't know super well. So I think it was I had to address, why don't I read these things? What is it about memoir, or less memoir? What is it about cancer stories, survival stories, parenting stories? What is it about them that I don't gravitate toward? And how do I make it engaging to somebody like me who doesn't necessarily delve into these kinds of books with a sense of respect of it? So it wasn't so much as an editor, I think, but more as somebody who doesn't want to come in arrogantly and be like, here's how it's going to be done. You know what I mean? Like that would just be lousy, I think. And so the editorial part, that came a lot later. It was just more at the beginning. It was just more of a matter of getting anything on page, and then see what I can work with. And then after a good chunk of it, realizing that a lot of what I got on page was kind of nonsense, or I would find myself the first two paragraphs of something would be talking about this, and then the last 3 pages are completely something else entirely. And those should be broken up into separate thoughts, or these ones should be tied together. Yeah, they're always happening at the same time, and deliberately making a point of not having them at the same time. I don't really have a tidy answer to that question because I don't think there's a tidy answer to it.
Maybe it's an untidy process too.
I mean, you got to appreciate the fact that the whole thing is untidy. I mean, even with a book like this, where you have somebody dying, and then you have the second half is us as a family unit trying to move forward through the grief and find hope for it. And you I can't end even the book's ending. It can't be like, well, we're all great now. You know what I mean? Like it's the hope and the way forward is through incremental change, which doesn't necessarily make for a satisfying narrative. And that was something that I battled with a lot of how do I push this into a direction of hopefulness where somebody doesn't leave this book with a giant hole of despair in the pit of their stomach. And like, how do I get to that point when it's touch and go from day to day in the truth? And so the messiness became part of it. Like, how are you going to ignore the messiness of it when that's life? Nothing's tidy.
Particularly if you're a parent.
Particularly if you're parents, particularly if you're dealing with grief, which I don't think anybody walks away from grief in a tidy way. It's not, and this is the thing I feel like I've said, but like grief isn't, you can do performative acts of grief to get you through stuff. I mean, this is what funerals are. It's a ceremony to help guide you from one stage to the next. And there are performative aspects of it, but like grief isn't a thing you do. Grief is a thing you just learn to live with. It's a thing that you learn to experience and to live with, and to make it's still always a part of you, even if it's been shoved into a little attic of your mind. It still exists, and it's still a thing that you have to contend with. And there is no real tidy answer to that. So I think I wanted the writing to reflect that in some capacity.
That leads me to the title. Did you come up with it?
I came up with Never Better. I just wanted to call it Never Better. And then the publishers were very adamant about adding a next part to it. And so there was, I said, how about Never Better, a memoir? And they're like, no, that's not. And they were like, how about Never Better, a journey through grief to the other end of blah blah. It always everything felt like a university paper. Do you know what I mean? Where you give it the snippy title, the pithy, whatever, and then colon, and then like a study on the blah 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 blah, where it takes a very serious tone. And I didn't want that at all. And so we kind of back and forth for a little while until we eventually settled on two kids, their dad and his wife's ghost. I think I always liked the concept of the ghost being in there. It was a bit of a hook for me. So in the end, yes. In the end, that's the one I fought for. But in the end, that's also the one that they didn't try to fight me on.
Yeah, I was curious about the wife's ghost portion because you'd write about being scared of ghosts in the book. And
yeah.
so, like, basically the intimation is that, like, you continue to be scared.
Maybe. That's interesting. I guess, yes. I guess there's nothing for me to dispute on that and be like, no, you have it all wrong. That's a fun reading into it. Yeah, I haven't considered that.
Yeah, I was just curious because, I mean, I know authors don't always choose their titles, right? That, the publisher kind of weighs in on these things. And so I was curious about the inclusion of the word ghost in reference to your wife in the title, and the fact that in the book, really the only time you talk about ghosts is being scared of them.
Yeah. Maybe it was just maybe I just liked the hook. But you're right. I don't really talk about ghosts. Um, yeah, that's interesting. Hopefully, I haven't led anyone down the wrong path. Certainly, I think again, it comes down to the idea of what would I read, or in a bookshelf, what would I pick up to read the back of. And I think it was probably meant more as a hook than anything else, if I'm being really upfront about it.
Yeah, no, and I mean you're being really upfront within the book itself too. Did you wrestle with like withholding anything or keeping anything for yourself? Is that something that was part of your thought process?
Yeah. I think anything that would particularly bring embarrassment or shame on the family, but nothing that like, I mean, even in my head, I mean, first of all, if there's anything I deliberately left out, I probably would have mentioned it here. But there's nothing that's really popping into my head. I think it was for the most part of just being um, respectful to who she is as a person. Um, no, I mean, there's a whole passage there where I talk about how I become very I'm sure it was a panic attack where I began really considering the idea that I might in my rage shake my baby to death, which would ultimately, I would what would I do in that situation? Well, I'd kill my other kid and I'd kill myself and then go through this really dark scenario of seeing it play out. Um, and that was a case where when I wrote it, my editor and my friend who looked at it were like, "Are you sure you want to include this guy?" And but that was really like the centerpiece of what I was leading up to the whole time. That was kind of my friend Julie, who I've known since university, who's the one who kind of helped me get this book off the ground. I had told her about that in like confidence, like, please don't think less of me. And but the thing was in the process of the chapter itself, I get out of it by thinking of the nuts and bolts. Okay, if I have to kill my other kid, how would I do it? How would I kill myself? What if I mess this up? What if I screw it up? What if I try to hang myself in the basement and I mess it up? It's not high enough. Oh, somebody's gonna have to find us in a few days. That's awful. I have to send them. I have to let somebody know to come check in the morning. That's rude. What do I do? And then in the process of figuring out the logistics of this murder suicide, I end up becoming so anxious at the idea of the minutia of it that I'm so overwhelmed by it that my friend started laughing about it. And I'm like, don't laugh at me. That's rude. And she's like, no, 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 no. This is what really makes it engaging. And so I felt like those two things had to be included. And so even in cases like this where I think, okay, what if my kid reads this later? What are they going to think about it? Do I need to censor this? And in those cases, I would say no, because you want to be really upfront. You got to be honest with people, and you can't give them the milk toast answers about things like that. But I think it was more of a matter of, is this something that does nothing for the narrative and would only serve to make her parents uncomfortable? Or, in the case of like, I'm trying to tell my story, but also I still know the people in our lives, and I don't want to upset any of them on a personal level. So when it was cases like that, I'd probably find myself skewing away from it, or I would write it in a draft and then figure out a way to sort of hide it a bit. But for the most part, it didn't really come up. I think a lot of it, the concern about what to include and what not to include was again, it was in the thing that got introduced earlier. How do you tell a story about somebody when they're not there? And it was the concern about messing it up more than anything. Than it was That was more than the censoring. It was more the asking her sisters, hey, do you have any good stories about her that aren't really about you? And when it comes down to it, her sisters, all the story, she'd be like, oh, there was a time that like I fell out of the tree and like landed on her and I got hurt. And I'd be like, yeah, but that's not really about her. That's really more about you. And she was there. or, you know, it's like how you're feeling in the absence of her. And then it becomes back to the untidy thing. So yeah, there probably wasn't a lot of cases where I found myself censoring it for censoring's sake. It was always, you know, I don't want to hurt the feelings of the people who are still around and for no reason. And I mean, thankfully that didn't really come up. I think that was more of a theoretical framework that I was working with at any given time.
Yeah, it sounds
Is
like the
that
motivation was like honoring her and centering her, but also recognizing the limitations of centering someone else when you're the person telling the story.
Yes, 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 yes. You know, it's addressed in the book that anything I say about her is still ultimately about me. And I think recognizing that was important. Although I feel that the back-to-back questions that you asked of that, have you tell somebody's story, and then do I read a lot of memoir? I'm wondering how the two are tied, and if there's something that I miss from reading other memoirs, or if this is just, you know, I'm wondering where you're coming from on this one.
Well, I'm coming at it from a process questioning, like just how you go about doing a work of this scope and of this intimacy, while maybe like not refraining, but like holding back something for yourself, right? Like, I don't know, like I think of like social media and that like we kind of present a specific view of ourselves to other people, but that there's maybe some stuff like we don't live fully open.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm sure. I don't know if if the book reads as me being guarded in certain respects. Um,
No, and I'm not saying you're guarded. Like certainly the part you related about, you know, the dark thoughts about, you know, like the logistics of murder, suicide, that doesn't seem like you're holding something back, but just, you know, but particularly thinking if your kids are going to read this eventually or kind of come to know their mama a little bit through a book like this, you know, what what goes in and maybe what doesn't go in is maybe a question.
I mean, like a lot of our, because we got together young, so a lot of our, you know, as much as we, you know, like we love to hang out, but also it was like there was a lot of, you know, smoking pot, fooling around, blah blah blah, like these kinds of things that like they're you know, universal, and everyone feels it, but like, you know, there's a line that you can draw before you start being tactless about anything. I think it was just a matter of like, don't be tactless with the dead, don't be tactless with the dead's loved ones, you know what I mean? Like that's I wouldn't be okay with that. It was also too, um I think I might have addressed it in the afterword, but it's not written like in the book itself. But like I quit this project a couple of times, because I just didn't feel like I could do it justice, or I felt like there was no reason for me to try to pursue this. Why am I doing this to myself, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of ethical questions that came up throughout. So maybe it was that writer editor part working in tandem in a way that I didn't realize, because you know, you really consider these things. What right do I have to tell this story? What good is it going to be to any of us telling the story? Is it going to be helpful or hurtful in the end? Um, you know, and the answer is that has been incredibly helpful, and that it doesn't seem like it's been hurtful. Nobody seems, you know, when, you know, I had asked her dad, you know, I'm like, did you read it? He said, yeah. And I'm like, are you mad at me? And that was always kind of a question I'd ask people. Are you mad at me? Um, Afterwards, and nobody seemed to be mad at me as a result of it. But I think, yeah, you definitely, when you're already on the verge of quitting a thing that you don't necessarily want to do, that you're not really taking any joy from, but it needs to be done in sort of a cathartic way, or you feel like maybe this can help people. Even that kind of thinking, the line of thinking of this could help people, that wasn't really until after I had the physical book in my hand, and I went, oh, there is a way through it. At the time, I think it was just a matter of getting it done, purging it, knowing that if I never finish writing this, I'll probably never finish writing a thing in my life, because I feel terribly guilty about not getting it done. and there's all these things battling back and forth. So yeah, you want to be respectful. There's certainly things that get held back in the process. As to what they would be, I'm not really sure. I don't know what I held back or what I didn't what I could have dived deeper on and didn't. But it got done.
Indeed, it did. Never better. Two kids, their dad and his wife's ghost is out through Durn Press right now. Gonzalo, thanks very much for taking some time to talk about the book.
I really appreciate this. Thank you. I hope anybody who reads it connects with it. I hope anybody who finds themselves in a position where they're reading this, not just for the novelty or curiosity, but if it's something that is there for somebody. Like while I was writing this, there was a few times, sorry to completely interrupt the thank you, but like there was a few times, I do want to address this, that like in the process of writing, I had come across a few people who were saying that they don't feel like there's enough stories from like the widower dad's perspective, the single dad's parents. It's always I think there's a lot of dads who sort of take incidences like these and just really rage it down, really suppress it. And so I want those people to kind of connect with it. I think it's there for them, even though it was always there for me. I think it's there for them too.
Indeed, it is.